He came to fix her dripping sink, an ordinary job. But when she asked, "Are you still alone?" the quiet in her kitchen became a question he couldn't answer, and a connection he couldn't deny. The scent of damp earth and old wood clung to Alden Finch like a second skin as he navigated the narrow, winding service stairwell of the Crimson Arch apartments. It was a smell he knew intimately, one that spoke of hidden leaks, forgotten corners, and the slow, inevitable decay of things built to last but left unattended. At 23, Alden had built his fledgling business, Finch Fix-It, on the promise of meticulousness, a quiet dedication to doing things right, even when no one was watching. He found a peculiar satisfaction in coaxing life back into tired pipes and stubborn fixtures, a stark contrast to the fleeting, superficial connections that seemed to define so much of the world outside his toolbox. This afternoon's call, a persistently dripping kitchen faucet in apartment 4B on Peregrine Place, had come through Mrs. Gable, a fiercely loyal client from the Willow Creek retirement community, who swore by his quiet competence. He'd imagined an elderly, perhaps slightly bewildered occupant. Instead, the woman who opened the door, Isadora Vance, had been a stark, captivating contradiction. Her dark, almost midnight black hair was swept back from a face that, while undeniably beautiful, carried the faint, almost imperceptible etchings of something profound and sorrowful. Her eyes, a striking hazel, held a depth that pulled at something restless within him, a silent invitation to a story he instinctively knew he shouldn't try to read. She wore a simple charcoal shirt and faded jeans, an understated elegance that somehow amplified the raw honesty of her presence. "Alden Finch?" Her voice was a low, husky murmur, a sound that resonated deep in his chest, an unexpected and unsettling vibration. He'd offered a polite nod, his toolbox feeling suddenly heavy in his hand, and stepped over the threshold into an apartment steeped in a quiet, almost reverent stillness. The air inside held the faint aroma of aged paper, old furniture, and a lingering sense of absence. It was the kind of apartment that whispered secrets, if you were willing to listen. Hours later, the battle with the ancient brass faucet was far from over. Alden knelt on the cool, scuffed linoleum, sweat beading on his forehead, his knuckles white around the wrench. The fittings were fused with years of calcified grime, resisting every twist and turn with a stubborn defiance that bordered on malevolent. The silence in the kitchen was broken only by the sharp, metallic clang of his tools, the occasional grunt of exertion from him, and the almost imperceptible sounds of Isadora moving in the adjacent living room, the soft rustle of fabric, the creak of an old floorboard, a distant muffled siren wailing from the city streets far below. He focused on the task, his mind a quiet, ordered hum of practical mechanics. This was his territory, the tangible world of nuts, bolts, and leaks. Leaks were solvable. Emotional landscapes, he knew, were far less predictable. A faint sigh escaped him as a particularly unyielding nut finally gave way. A small, hard-won victory. He shifted, his knees protesting, and reached for a cleaner rag. That's when the shadow fell over him, cool and silent. Isadora stood in the kitchen doorway, a ceramic mug cupped in both hands, its gentle warmth steaming faintly. The soft aroma of chamomile and something subtly floral drifted from her. She didn't speak, just observed him, her hazel eyes unblinking, unreadable, yet undeniably present. He felt the familiar prickle of discomfort, the awkwardness that always seemed to rise in him around beautiful, complicated women. He was fluent in the language of plumbing diagrams and torque wrenches, but the unspoken nuances of human connection remained stubbornly elusive. "Still at it?" she asked, her voice a soft, almost contemplative murmur. It wasn't a question of impatience, but something deeper, something that felt less like an inquiry about the sink and more like an observation of his very being. Alden straightened, wincing slightly, trying to project a composed professionalism he didn't quite feel. "Almost there," he replied, gesturing vaguely at the ancient pipes. "These old fittings don't like to let go." "They don't make them with this kind of stubbornness anymore. He attempted a light, self-deprecating chuckle, but it felt hollow, absorbed by the quiet dignity of her presence. A faint, almost wistful smile touched Isadora's lips. "No, they don't," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze drifted around the small, somewhat cluttered kitchen, as if seeing it anew, or perhaps seeing it through his eyes for the first time. There was a faint, almost imperceptible sigh that escaped her, a sound weighted with unspoken histories. He noticed the way her fingers traced the rim of her mug, a delicate, almost nervous habit. He nodded, unsure how to respond to the quiet melancholy that seemed to permeate her words. He often felt a similar sense of weariness with the fleeting, disposable nature of modern things, though his thoughts leaned towards engineered obsolescence, not existential dread. "Could be," he mumbled, turning back to the task. He could feel her eyes on him, a gentle, unwavering pressure on his back, making the skin on his neck prickle. It wasn't intrusive, not exactly, but intensely aware, as if she were trying to unravel a complex code in his posture, in the precise methodical movements of his hands. "You're very thorough," she commented, her voice still quiet, almost reverent. "Most people just want a quick fix. Something to get by." "Quick fixes don't last," Alden stated, his voice a little gruffer than he intended, still focused on meticulously cleaning the threads of a pipe, ensuring no lingering debris would compromise the new washer. "And then you're calling someone else in a month, paying double. I prefer to do it right the first time." It was his mantra, his professional creed. A commendable philosophy, she mused, and he heard the soft, delicate sound of her taking a sip of tea. A rare one, too, these days. The conversation drifted, a series of short, polite exchanges punctuated by the methodical sounds of his work. He gathered, without her directly stating it, that she worked from home, something with graphic design, though she offered no details. He also deduced, from the quiet hum of the apartment, the stillness that suggested a singular occupant, that she lived alone. He noticed small, poignant details. A framed photograph on a distant shelf in the living room, too far to discern faces, but its size and composition hinted at a family portrait. A collection of intricately hand-painted ceramic mugs on a high shelf, too numerous for one person, a stack of well-worn books on a side table, their spines creased and faded from countless readings. It painted a picture of a life lived, a life that had perhaps once been fuller, richer, more vibrant, and had somehow, gradually, quietly, thinned out. A life that, like her faucet, had developed a slow, persistent leak. As dusk deepened, casting long, distorted shadows across the linoleum, Alden finally tightened the last fitting. He turned the faucet, and a steady, strong stream of water gushed out, clear and clean, without a single tremor or drip. The familiar sound of flowing water, pure and unimpeded, was always a satisfying end to a job, a small triumph of order over chaos. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, a quiet sense of accomplishment settling over him. "There," he announced, his voice a little louder than intended in the now hushed room. "All done. No more leaks." Isadora stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the perfectly functioning faucet. A small, genuine smile, unburdened by the subtle sorrow he'd seen earlier, touched her lips. "Oh, thank goodness," she breathed, the relief palpable in her voice. "I thought I'd be living with that incessant drip forever. It was starting to drive me mad, the constant, tiny reminder of things." She paused, then turned her gaze to him, and this time, the intensity in her hazel eyes was unmistakable, a direct, unfiltered beam that cut through his practiced composure. "Thank you, Alden. Truly. You've done a wonderful, wonderful job." He felt a flush creep up his neck, a familiar heat that had nothing to do with the kitchen's warmth. "Just doing my job," he mumbled, gathering his tools, the familiar ritual a small, sturdy shield against the unexpected warmth of her gratitude, the unsettling depth of her gaze. I'll just pack up now." She didn't move. She just stood there, her head tilted slightly, her eyes still on him, a soft, unblinking gaze that felt surprisingly intimate, as if she were trying to commit him to memory. The silence stretched, becoming denser, more palpable, no longer merely the absence of sound, but a living presence. It was the kind of silence that invited introspection, that seemed to demand something unspoken, something profoundly personal. Alden suddenly felt acutely aware of his own dishevelment, the smudges of grease on his shirt, the faint scent of pipe sealant clinging to his hands. He wished, foolishly, that he had thought to wash up earlier, to present a more polished version of himself. And then softly, her voice barely a whisper in the encroaching twilight, she asked, "Are you still alone?" The question hung in the air, suspended like the dust motes in the last slivers of weak, diluted light. It wasn't about the apartment, he knew that. It wasn't about whether he was the only living soul in the room. It was about something far deeper, far more personal, a question that cut straight to the core of his solitary existence. The implication, unspoken but clear, resonated within him, echoing a quiet truth he rarely acknowledged, even to himself. His hand, reaching instinctively for his large crescent wrench, paused mid-air. His gaze, caught in hers, found in the deepening shadows a vast, unplumbed sorrow that seemed to mirror his own, a shared understanding of solitary existence. He didn't know how to answer, or even if he should. The question felt less like an inquiry and more like an invitation, a tentative step across an invisible threshold, and he found himself both profoundly intrigued and deeply, unsettlingly, afraid. You won't believe who took his side. This is just the start. It gets stronger. Alden's hand, suspended over his open toolbox, felt heavy, as if the air itself had solidified around it. The question, "Are you still alone?" resonated in the quiet kitchen, a delicate, almost fragile thing that threatened to shatter the careful professional facade he maintained, the one he had meticulously constructed since adolescence. He looked at Isadora, really looked at her, and saw past the polite hostess, past the client, to the vulnerable woman beneath, a woman etched with the subtle lines of experience and loss. Her expression was unreadable, a blend of raw curiosity, palpable apprehension, and something akin to a quiet, profound desperation that mirrored his own unvoiced thoughts. The dim light from the single overhead bulb, now the only illumination in the room, cast long, distorted shadows that blurred her features, making her seem both closer and more distant, a figure simultaneously inviting and enigmatic. He cleared his throat, a small, involuntary sound that seemed to crackle in the silence. "Alone?" he repeated, trying to buy himself time, trying to find the right words, or any words at all, that wouldn't betray the sudden, unwelcome tremor in his voice. His mind raced, scrambling for a deflection, a professional, non-committal answer. But her gaze was too direct, too knowing, too unwavering. It wasn't a question he could answer with a technical explanation about plumbing fixtures or the longevity of repairs. It demanded something real, something from the quiet, hidden chambers of his own life. Isadora's eyes didn't waver, holding his with a quiet intensity that felt almost physical. "Yes," she affirmed, her voice a little stronger now, yet still soft, carrying the weight of shared experience. "Are you still living by yourself? No one? Waiting for you?" She gestured vaguely towards the door, then back at him, a slight, almost imperceptible movement of her hand, as if sketching the invisible boundaries of his life. Her fingers, he noticed again, were long and slender, unadorned, save for that thin, simple silver band on her right ring finger, a plain piece that could have been anything from a fashion accessory to a placeholder for a deep, irreplaceable loss. The silence stretched again, thick and heavy, pregnant with unspoken emotions, with the electric hum of two souls suddenly laid bare. Alden felt a prickle of heat on his cheeks, a blush that wasn't merely embarrassment. It was a strange, unsettling mix of discomfort and a nascent, unfamiliar warmth that spread through his chest. He rarely spoke about his personal life, especially not with clients. His days were filled with the tangible, with the concrete satisfaction of repairs and maintenance. His evenings, more often than not, were spent in the quiet solitude of his small two-room apartment above the old red-brick bakery on Hawthorne Street, poring over textbooks for his online business management courses or tinkering with salvaged electronics. There was no one waiting for him, not truly, not in the way her question implied. Yes, he finally managed, his voice a little hoarse, barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat again, feeling the immense weight of the confession, however simple, however undeniable. I live alone. It's quiet. He tried to infuse the last word with a casual indifference, a shrug of youthful detachment, but it came out sounding more like a quiet resignation, an unvarnished truth. A faint, almost wistful smile touched Isadora's lips, softening the subtle lines around her mouth. Quiet, she echoed, the word a soft sigh in the stillness of the room, as if she were tasting its implications, its inherent loneliness. Yes, it can be, can't it? Too quiet sometimes. So quiet it starts to hum. Her gaze dropped from his eyes to his hands, lingering on the grease smudges and the faint calluses, then back up again, her eyes searching his for a reflection of her own internal landscape. Do you ever find yourself wishing it wasn't? The directness of her question surprised him, pierced through the last remnants of his carefully constructed reserve. It was an intimacy he wasn't accustomed to, an emotional vulnerability laid bare in the sterile confines of her kitchen, illuminated by the cold, unforgiving light of a single bulb. He found himself nodding almost imperceptibly, a silent admission that spoke volumes. The truth was, yes, he did. More often than he cared to admit, the silence, which had once been a familiar comfort, a sanctuary from the relentless noise of the world, had lately begun to feel like a heavy, stifling blanket, oppressive and isolating. He often found himself staring at the peeling wallpaper of his own apartment, listening to the muffled sounds of the bakery below, and wishing for something, anything, to break the quiet. Isadora stepped a little closer, just one step, but it seemed to close the vast emotional distance between them. The faint scent of her herbal tea, subtle and earthy, now mingled with a clean, almost ethereal fragrance, perhaps her soap, drifting towards him, enveloping him. I know the feeling, she murmured, her voice barely audible, thick with an unspoken understanding. Her eyes held his, and in their depths he saw a profound sadness, a deep, pervasive loneliness that resonated with his own, a silent acknowledgement, a shared burden. He didn't need to ask what noise she was referring to. He imagined the phantom laughter, the phantom footsteps, the everyday sounds of a life once shared, now abruptly, brutally silenced. He thought again of the photograph in the living room, the unseen faces that once brought life to this quiet apartment. A wave of unexpected empathy, raw and tender, washed over him, softening the edges of his awkwardness, his youth, his inexperience. He found himself wanting to reach out, to offer some small, clumsy comfort, but he wasn't sure how, or if it was even appropriate. It is, Alden agreed, his voice surprisingly steady now, stripped of all pretense. A very different kind. The moment stretched, fraught with unspoken feelings, with the shimmering tension of two fragile souls recognizing something familiar in each other. Isadora's gaze dropped to his hands again, lingering on the grease smudges and the faint, ingrained dirt beneath his fingernails. Then, slowly, with a breathtaking hesitation, she raised her hand, her fingers hovering for a suspended moment before she gently, almost reverently, brushed a small streak of grime from his cheek. The touch was feather-light, fleeting, yet it sent a jolt through him, a jolt that wasn't entirely unpleasant, not physical, but deeply, profoundly emotional. It was a touch of unexpected tenderness, a gesture of quiet, unburdened care. He froze, not daring to move, his breath catching in his throat, his very being suspended in that fragile instant. "You have a smudge," she explained, her voice a little breathless, her eyes still fixed on his cheek, avoiding his direct gaze, as if she herself were surprised by her own impulse. A faint, delicate blush rose in her cheeks, mirroring the sudden, unexpected heat he felt in his own. "Oh, right. Thanks," he mumbled, his voice thick, almost unrecognizable. He felt a ridiculous, childish urge to wipe his cheek with his own hand, to erase the lingering sensation, but he resisted, afraid to break the fragile, incandescent spell that had fallen over them. The air in the kitchen crackled with an unspoken tension, a palpable awareness that something profound had shifted irrevocably. The professional barrier, thin as it was, had crumbled to dust with that brief, gentle, intensely personal touch. Would you like some tea?" Isadora asked, her voice a little shaky, a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of normalcy, to fill the overwhelming silence with the mundane. "I have chamomile. It's calming." She gestured towards the kettle on the stove, a small, almost desperate plea in her eyes. Alden hesitated. His rational mind screamed at him, a harsh, insistent voice demanding he politely decline, that he pack his tools, that he leave. This was a client. This was inappropriate. He had other calls to make, an evening of online courses and textbooks ahead. But something in her eyes, in the quiet, almost desperate plea of her voice, held him rooted to the spot. A silent, powerful anchor. The thought of stepping back out into the indifferent, sprawling city, into the familiar, echoing quiet of his own small apartment, suddenly felt overwhelmingly bleak, like stepping into a cold, empty room. He found himself nodding, almost against his will, a silent capitulation. "Chamomile sounds nice," he said, the words feeling foreign, awkward on his tongue. He had never been a tea drinker, preferring the bitter, sharp jolt of black coffee. But the offer wasn't about the tea. He knew that. It was about something else entirely, something far more resonant. Isadora's face softened, a small, genuine smile blooming there, making the weariness around her eyes less pronounced, almost erasing it. "Good," she whispered, and a faint tremor ran through her voice, a fragile thread of emotion. She turned to the stove, her movements still graceful despite the slight tremor in her hands. The kettle, a squat, unassuming thing, was already on the burner, a faint wisp of steam rising from its spout, a soft, comforting sound in the hushed room. As she busied herself, Alden slowly, deliberately, began to put his tools back into his heavy canvas bag. Each clink of metal against metal sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen, a series of definitive, almost final pronouncements. He zipped the main compartment, the sound a sharp, resolute whisper. He wasn't leaving. Not yet. He leaned against the cool, worn counter, watching her. The way the soft kitchen light caught the strands of her dark hair, illuminating the faint silver threads woven throughout, the slight, elegant curve of her back as she reached for 2 ceramic teacups. He noticed again the faint, almost imperceptible scar just above her left eyebrow, a tiny, silent story etched into her skin. A life, he thought, filled with unseen narratives in every line, every subtle detail. She poured the steaming water into 2 mugs, the familiar clink of ceramic on ceramic echoing through the room, a domestic, comforting sound. The scent of chamomile, sweet and earthy, began to fill the air, a gentle grounding aroma that wrapped around them both. She brought 1 mug to him, her fingers brushing his as he took it. This time, the contact lingered for a fraction of a second longer, a spark of something electric passing between them, a silent current flowing between 2 isolated islands. Their eyes met again, and in that brief, shared glance, the unspoken truth between them deepened, became heavier, more resonant. "Here," she said, her voice a little steadier now, though still soft, infused with a newfound tenderness. Be careful, it's hot. He took a careful sip, the warmth spreading through him, chasing away the subtle chill that had settled deep in his bones. A chill he hadn't even realized was there until now. It was a strange comfort, this shared silence, this unexpected intimacy with a woman he had met only hours before, a woman who had, with a single simple question, laid bare a profound loneliness he had stubbornly kept hidden, even from himself. He felt a powerful, almost magnetic pull towards her, a quiet, insistent force that transcended the simple dynamics of client and handyman. It was a dangerous pull, he knew. She was older, more experienced, seemingly carrying a weight of past sorrow that he, in his youthful inexperience, could barely comprehend. And he, in turn, was just Alden, the quiet handyman who fixed leaks, a boy man navigating the clumsy, uncertain terrain of early adulthood. Yet in that moment, in the soft, intimate glow of the kitchen light, none of that seemed to matter. The rational arguments, the societal prohibitions, the practical realities, they all receded, replaced by the overwhelming, undeniable truth of the present moment. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw not just a client, but a woman, vulnerable and resilient, reaching out for something, anything, to fill the quiet. And he, surprisingly, found himself reaching back, tentatively, but undeniably. What happens now, no one expected. But it's what restores fairness. The quiet in Isadora's kitchen stretched, no longer simply the absence of sound, but a tangible presence, a humming entity that held them both in its silent embrace. The chamomile tea, despite its gentle, earthy aroma, did little to soothe the frantic, erratic beat of Alden's heart. He stood there, mug in hand, the steam rising between them like a fragile, translucent veil, obscuring nothing, revealing everything. He could feel Isadora's gaze on him, a soft, unwavering weight, and he knew, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that whatever came next would redefine their accidental, fragile connection. He took another slow, deliberate sip of the tea, the warmth a grounding sensation in his trembling hands, a small anchor in the surging tide of his emotions. He was acutely aware of the ticking clock on the wall, its steady rhythm marking the inexorable passage of time, each second amplifying the tension that shimmered in the air between them. He needed to say something, anything, to break the silence that felt both comforting and suffocating, both a sanctuary and a trap. "It's a nice tea," he managed, the words sounding utterly inadequate, painfully trivial against the backdrop of their shared vulnerability, their quiet, mutual confession. He felt the familiar flush creep up his neck again, the heat spreading through his face, the awkwardness resurfacing with a vengeance, threatening to consume him. Isadora didn't respond directly to his clumsy comment about the tea. Her eyes, still fixed on his, held a depth that seemed to draw him in, pull him closer, like a quiet, irresistible current. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her chest rising and falling imperceptibly, a fragile rhythm in the charged stillness. "Alden," she began, her voice a low murmur, a sound imbued with a raw, almost desperate honesty. Why do you think we feel this way?" The abruptness of her question, the direct plunge into the heart of the matter, startled him, stripped him bare. He hadn't expected her to name it, not so openly, not so courageously. His mind, usually so adept at practical solutions, at the logical unraveling of mechanical problems, felt like a tangled, intractable knot of emotions. He shifted his weight, suddenly feeling too large, too clumsy, too intensely present in the small, intimate space of her kitchen. The mug in his hand suddenly felt like an unwieldy burden. "Feel what way?" he asked, the feigned ignorance thin, transparent, and utterly unconvincing even to his own ears. He knew precisely what she meant. The invisible threads that had woven themselves between them, tightening with each shared glance, each lingering silence, each accidental, feather-light touch. The magnetic pull that had drawn him in from the moment she opened her door, a silent, undeniable force. Isadora stepped closer again, another small, deliberate step until she was barely an arm's length away. The faint scent of her perfume, light and floral, now enveloped him entirely, a soft, intoxicating cloud. Her eyes, usually so guarded, so veiled with a quiet sorrow, seemed to plead for an answer, for understanding, for a shared truth. "This," she whispered, her voice laced with a raw, aching vulnerability that tore at something deep inside him, something he hadn't known was there. She didn't gesture, didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The single word was enough. This. The palpable current that hummed between them. The undeniable pull. The forbidden intimacy that had blossomed so unexpectedly, so powerfully, in the most mundane of circumstances. He looked away, his gaze falling to the condensation forming on the outside of his mug, a small, tangible distraction from the overwhelming intensity of her gaze. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, a cold, hard stone of fear and longing. He was young, yes, barely out of his early 20s, but not naive. He knew the implications of this, the unspoken rules it violated, the boundaries it threatened to erase. She was older, a client, a woman who carried an unspoken history, a silent legacy of pain. He was just a handyman, a quiet, unassuming figure who fixed broken things. It was wrong, it was impossible, it was undeniably, terrifyingly electrifying. I don't know, he confessed, his voice barely audible, a raw, honest whisper in the stillness. The words were a painful admission of his own confusion, his own profound susceptibility, his own lack of answers. He felt the crushing weight of his own loneliness pressing down on him, amplifying the undeniable truth of her question, making it echo in the hollow chambers of his chest. He had been alone for so long, and now, in this unassuming kitchen, with this captivating, sorrowful woman, the silence felt different, less heavy, less oppressive, almost shared, infused with a quiet, mutual understanding. "But you feel it, don't you?" Her voice was firm now, insistent, pushing him, urging him to acknowledge the unspoken, to name the elusive truth. The connection. He finally met her gaze, and this time he didn't look away. He couldn't. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of his own fear, his own quiet longing. He saw the same question that had plagued him since her first quiet inquiry about his solitude, since the faint, almost imperceptible tremor that had run through him when her voice first met his. He saw a kindred spirit, unexpectedly found, unexpectedly revealed, in the most mundane of places. "Yes," he admitted, the single word a quiet roar in the silent room, a powerful, resonant sound that seemed to fill every corner. It was a release, an acknowledgement, a profound, terrifying surrender. "Yes, I feel it." A tremor ran through Isadora's shoulders, almost imperceptible, but Alden noticed it, acutely aware of every subtle shift in her posture, every nuance of her expression. A long, drawn-out sigh escaped her, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years, of unspoken griefs, of quiet endurance. Her eyes, still locked with his, shimmered, and he realized with a jolt that they were glistening with unshed tears, gathering like precious dew on her lower lashes, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of something else entirely. Recognition, release, perhaps even a fragile, terrifying joy. "It's wrong," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly, the words a desperate, almost automatic defense. Her hand, the one with the thin silver ring, rose slowly, hesitantly, towards him, as if drawn by an invisible string. Her fingers trembled, reaching, yet not quite touching, hovering inches from his arm. It was a delicate, agonizing dance of approach and retreat, a physical manifestation of the intense internal conflict raging within them both. "It's impossible. I'm..." The words trailed off, lost in the overwhelming tide of unspoken emotions. He saw the struggle in her eyes, the warring forces of desire and restraint, the societal expectations, and her profound personal pain. He saw her trying desperately to pull back, to rebuild the invisible walls that had so unexpectedly, so irrevocably, crumbled. But something within him, a fierce, protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed, surged forward, an undeniable force. He didn't want her to pull away. He didn't want the connection, this fragile, incandescent thing, to vanish into the quiet hum of her lonely apartment, to become just another forgotten echo in the crimson arch. Before he could overthink it, before his rational mind could present 1,000 logical reasons why he shouldn't, why it was foolish, dangerous, Alden took a single deliberate step forward, closing the small emotional gap between them. His own hand, surprisingly steady, surprisingly sure, reached out and gently but firmly took hers. Her fingers were cool against his, slender and delicate, yet surprisingly strong, resilient. The simple, profound act of holding her hand was an electric current, a silent symphony of unspoken understanding, a conduit for all the words they couldn't say. Isadora's eyes widened, a small gasp escaping her lips, a soft, breathless sound that vibrated through him. She didn't pull away. Her gaze remained fixed on his, a potent mixture of shock, raw fear, and a desperate, fragile, breathtaking hope. The unshed tears now broke free, tracing shimmering silent paths down her cheeks. But they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of something else entirely. Recognition, release, perhaps even a fragile, overwhelming joy. He held her gaze, his thumb gently, almost reverently, stroking the back of her hand, feeling the delicate pulse beneath her skin. He didn't say anything. There were no more words needed, no explanations, no apologies. The air between them, once so thick with unspoken questions, was now filled with a quiet, powerful understanding, a silent pact. It was a profound, irreversible moment of choice, made not with grand declarations or passionate pronouncements, but with a simple, resonant touch, a tender, unspoken commitment. He felt the trembling in her hand, a mirroring of the tremors in his own heart, a silent acknowledgement of the shared tremor that had run through both of them. The world outside, the sprawling, indifferent city of Oak Haven, the old, sighing walls of the Crimson Arch apartments faded into an indistinct hum, a distant, forgotten backdrop. There was only the quiet kitchen, the lingering scent of chamomile, the soft, intimate glow of the overhead light, and the electric current that hummed between their joined hands. It wasn't a promise of forever, not necessarily. It wasn't a grand, romantic gesture. It was simply a touch, an acknowledgement, a silent communion of two lonely souls who, in an unexpected moment, had found a fragile, beautiful, undeniable connection. He didn't know what would happen next, or what this moment would lead to, but in that second, holding her hand, feeling the delicate weight of hers in his, he knew with a profound certainty that something fundamental had shifted, irreversibly, within him, within her, within the very fabric of their separate, solitary lives. The quiet of his life, and perhaps hers, would never be the same. He held her gaze, and a shared, quiet understanding settled between them, a silent pact forged in the fading light, in the sudden, tender weight of two hands finally joined.